Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and we're going to continue to share some more of this particular book, The Committee of 300 by Dr. John Coleman. I had an earlier video today about him, and we've gone through probably about 30 or 40 pages of the information. And again, my name is Brant Hunt. The day is the 22nd day of January 2023. And we're reading a book that is dealing with the Committee of 300, who has been in existence for quite a while, probably a couple of hundred years, if not longer. And we're going to continue that. Again, my channel, Discerning What Is True, is on not only on YouTube, not only on Facebook, and also on Odyssey. So let's get into the meat of this whole particular book as we continue. So let us stop here for a moment. Are we to believe that with all the modern and vastly improved satellite surveillance techniques, including satellite reconnaissance, available to law enforcement agencies in these countries, that the vile trade cannot be pinpointed and stopped? How is it that law enforcement agencies cannot go in and destroy these laboratories once they are discovered? This is the case, and we still cannot interdict the interdict into the heroin trade, that our anti-narcotic service ought to be known as the generetics and not drug enforcement agencies. Even a child could tell our alleged drug watchers what to do. Simply keep a check on all factors making acetic anhydride the most essential chemical component needed by laboratories to refine heroin from raw opium. Then follow the trail. It's as simple as that. I am reminded of Peter Sellers in the Pink Panther series when I think of a law enforcement officer's efforts to locate a heroin refining laboratories. Even someone as bumbling as the imaginary inspector would have had no trouble in following the route taken by acetic anhydride shipments to their final destination. Governments can make laws that would oblige manufacturers of acetic anhydride to keep scrupulous records showing who buys the chemical and for what purpose it is to be used. But do not hold your breaths on this one, folks. Remember, dope, D-O-P-E, equals big business, and big business is done by the oligarchy families of Europe and the United States Eastern level establishment. The drug business is not a mafia operation, nor one run by the Colombian cocaine cartels. The noble families of Britain and America top people are not going to advertise their role in the shop windows. They always have a layer of front men to do the dirty work. Remember, British and American nobility never dirtied their hands in the China opium trade. The lords and ladies were much too clever for that, as were the American elites, that is, the Delanos, Forbes, Appletons, Bacons, Boylstons, Perkins, Russells, Cunninghams, Shaws, Coolidges, Parkmans, Runningwells, Cabots, and Cotmans. By no means a complete list of families in America who grew immensely wealthy from the China opium trade. Since this is not a book about drug trade, I cannot of necessity cover the subject in in-depth manner. What is important to the Committee of 300 must be emphasized. America is run not by 60 families, but by 300 families, and England is run by 100 families. And as we shall see, these families are intertwined through marriage, companies, banks, not to mention ties to the black nobility, Freemasonry, the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, and so on. These are the people who, through their surrogates, find ways to protect huge shipments of heroin from Hong Kong, Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, and ensure they reach the marketplaces in the United States and Western Europe with the minimum cost of doing business. Shipments of cocaine are sometimes interdicted, and seized. That is mere window dressing, folks. Oftentimes, the shipments seized belong to a new organization trying to break into the trade. Such competition is put out of business by informing the authorities exactly where it is going to enter the U.S. and who the owners are. The big stuff is never touched, you see. Heroin is too expensive. It is worthy of note that U.S. drug enforcement agencies operatives are not allowed into Hong Kong. They cannot examine any ship manifest before it leaves the port. One wonders why, if there is such much international cooperation going on, what the media likes to characterize as smashing the dope trade. Clearly, the trade routes for heroin are protected by a higher authority. In South America, apart from Mexico, cocaine is king. The production of cocaine is very simple, unlike heroin, and great fortunes are to be made by those willing to take risks for and on behalf of the higher ups. As in the heroin trade, interlopers are not welcome and often finish up as casualties or victims of family feuds. In Colombia, the drug mafia is a close knitted family, but such has been the bad publicity operated by the MI9 guerrilla attacks on the Justice Building in Bogota. MI9, M19, is a private army of the cocaine barons, and the murder of Rodrigo Lara Bonito, a prominent prosecutor and a judge, that the higher authority had to rearrange matters in Colombia. According to the Ochios of the Medellin cartel, turned themselves in after being assured that they would not suffer any loss of fortune, harm of any kind, nor would they be extradited to the United States. A deal was struck that provided they repatriate the bulk of their huge narco dollar fortunes to Colombian banks, no punitive actions would be taken against them. The Ochials, that is George Fabio, and their top man Pablo Escobar, would be held in private jails that resemble a luxury class motel rooms, and then be sentenced to a maximum term of 2 years to be served in the same motel jails. This deal is ongoing. The Ochios has also been guaranteed the right to continue to manage their business from their motel prisons. So it's all a show, you see. But that does not mean that cocaine trade has come to a screeching halt, folks. On the contrary, it has simply been transferred to a second string Cali cartel and is business as usual. For some strange reason, the Cali cartel, which is equal in size to the Medellin cartel, has been, at least up until now, largely ignored by the DEA. Cali differs from the Medellin cartel in that it is run by businessmen who eschew all forms of violence and never break agreements. Even more significant is that Cali does virtually no business in Florida. My source told me that the Cali cartel is run by shrewd businessmen unlike any seen in the cocaine business. He believes that they were specially appointed, but does not know by whom. They never call attention to themselves, he said. They do not go around importing red Ferraris like Orzoris, yet attracting immediate attention because it is forbidden to import such cars into Colombia. Cali cartel markets are in Los Angeles, New York, and Houston, which closely parallel the heroin markets, you see. Cali has not shown any signs of moving into Florida. A former DEA operative who is a colleague of mine recently stated who is a colleague of mine, said recently, these Cali people are sure smart. They are a different breed to the Ochio brothers. They act like professional businessmen. They are now larger than the Medellin cartel, and I think we are going to see a lot more cocaine get into the United States than ever before. The kidnapping of Manuel Cornoego will facilitate an easier flow through Panama of cocaine and money. What with so many banks there? So much for President George Bush operation called Just Cause. All it did was made life a great deal easier for Nicholas Ardillo Barleto, who used to be run by the Ochiosi brothers and who is fixing the front of the Cali cartel. Based on my experience with the heroin trade, I believe that the Committee of 300 has stepped in and taken over full control of the South American cocaine trade. There is no other explanation for the rise of Cali cartel, which is coupled with the kidnapping of Noriega. Did Bush take his orders from London regarding Noriega? There is every indication that he was literally pushed into invading Panama and kidnapping Noriega, who had become a serious impediment to trade in Panama, especially in the banking business. Several former intelligence agents have given me their opinions which coincide with my own. Like the Gulf War that followed in the wake of Panama, it was only after several calls from the British ambassador in Washington that Bush finally plucked up enough courage to make his total illegal move on General Noriega. That he was supported by the British press, the New York Times, the British intelligence-run newspaper, speaks volume. Noriega was formerly the darling of Washington establishment, that is. He frequently hobnobbed with William Casey and Oliver North, even met with President George Bush on at least 2 occasions. Noriega was often seen at the Pentagon, where he was treated like one of those air potentialities, that is, and the red carpet was always laid out for him at CIA headquarters at Langley, Virginia. U.S. Army intelligence and the CIA are on record as having paid him $320,000. Then storm clouds began to appear on the horizon about the same time the Cali cartel was taking over the cocaine trade from the Ochios brothers and Pablo Escobar. Led by Senator Jesse Helms, who sold out to Ariel Sharon and the Israeli political party in 1985, there suddenly began an agitation for the removal of Noriega. Jesse Helms and those of a like mind were backed up by Simon Hurst, a British intelligence agent working for the New York Times, which had been a British intelligence mouthpiece in the U.S. since the time that MI6 boss Sir William Stevenson occupied the RCA building in New York. It's very significant that Helms should have chosen to lead the charge against Noriega. Helms is the darling of Sharon faction in Washington. Sharon was the principal gun runner in Central America and Colombia. Moreover, Jesse Helms, that is a senator, has the respect of the Christian fundamentalists who believe in the maxim, Israel is my country, right or wrong. Thus, a powerful momentum was created to get Noriega. It is evident that Noriega could well prove a serious impediment in international drug merchants and their committee of 300 bankers, so he had to be removed before he could do some significant damage. Bush was pressured by the British masters to conduct an illegal search and seizure operation in Panama that resulted in deaths of no less than 7,000 Panamanians and wanton destruction of property. Nothing to implicate Noriega as a drug dealer was ever found. So he was kidnapped and brought to the United States in one of the most blatant examples of international bigotry in history. This illegal action probably best meets the Bush philosophy, the moral dimensions of America, that is, read British royal family connections. The Committee of 300 foreign policy requires us to chart a moral course through a world of less evils. That's the real world, not black and white, very few absolutes. It was a lesser evil to kidnap Noriega rather than have him upend the banks in Panama working for the Committee of 300. The Noriega case is a prototype of monstrous one world government actions waiting in the wings. As the emboldened Bush came right out in the open, unafraid because we, the people, have put on a spiritual mantle that accommodates lies and wants no part of truth. This is the world we have decided to accept, that is. If it were not so, a firestorm of anger would have swept the country over the invasion of Panama, which would not have stopped until Bush was hounded from office. Nixon's Watergate transgressions pale in insignificance next to the many impeachable offenses committed by President Bush when he ordered the invasion of Panama to kidnap General Noriega. The government case against Noriega is based upon perjury testimony by a group of big men, for the most part already convicted and lying through their individual and collective teeth to jail their own sentences lighter. Their performance would have pleased Gilbert and Sullivan immensely were they alive today. They made them the rulers of DEA. Might be APROPs instead of they made them the rulers of Queen's Navy from HMS Pinafore. It is altogether grotesque to see how these con artists are performing like not so well trained SEALs for the U.S. Justice Department. That is, if we cared to insult such a nice, clean animal by such an unworthy comparison. Key dates conflict wildly. Key details are altogether conspicuous by their absence. Lapse of memory or crucial points all add up to the obvious fact that the government had no case against Noriega. But that does not matter. The Royal Institute for International Affairs, the RIIA, says convict him anyway, and that is what poor Noriega can expect. One of Justice Department star witnesses, one called Floyd Carlton Caceres, a former pilot for the Oshio brothers. Following his arrest in 1986, Carlton tried to ease his position at the expense of Noriega. He told his DEA interrogators that the Oshio brothers had paid Noriega $600,000 to allow 3 planes loaded with cocaine to land and refuel in Panama. But once in court in Miami, it soon became apparent that what was billed as a star witness for the prosecutor was at best a damn squib. On their cross-examination, the true story emerged. Far from being paid to allow the flights, Noriega wasn't even approached by the Ochios. Worse yet, in December of 1983, Noriega had ordered that all flights to Panama from Medellin be refused permission to land in Panama. Carlton is not the only discredited witness. One who is even a sorrier liar than Carlton is Carlos Velio, who was in a kingpin of the Medellin cartel until he was arrested in Spain and sent to the U.S., who gave the DA the most vital information. That letter was in Madrid. The DA reluctantly concedes that they owed this important cash to Noriega. Now, however, the Justice Department is using the letter as a witness against Noriega. If nothing else, a single witness demonstrates the wretchedness of the United States government case against Manuel Noriega. Return for service rendered, Leo has been granted a easing of his sentence as far nicer quarters, a room with a view and a television, and his family was given permanent residence in the United States. Wow. Robert Merkel, a former U.S. attorney who prosecuted Lecter in 1988, told the Washington Post, "I don't think the government should be in the business of dealing with Carlos Lecter, period. This guy's a liar from beginning to end." The Justice Department, purely a name which bears no resemblance to what it's supposed to stand for, has pulled out all its dirty tricks against Noriega, illegally wiretapping his conversations with his lawyer, appointing a government lawyer to pretend he was serving Noriega, but who quit in the middle of everything, freezing his bank account so that Noriega is unable to conduct a proper defense, kidnapping, illegal search, and seizure. You name it. The government has broken more laws than Noriega has ever done, if indeed he has broken any laws at all. It is the U.S. Justice Department that is on trial 10-4 more than General Noriega. Noriega's case shows the glaring evil system that passes for justice in this country. The U.S. war on drugs is on trial, as is the Bush administration's so-called drug policy. The Noriega trial, although it will end in a violent and flagrant rape of justice, will nevertheless offer some compensation to those who are not blind, deaf, and dumb. It proves for once for all that Britain is in charge of our government, and it will reveal the ultimate bankrupt ideology of the Bush administration, which ought to have as its motto, no matter what, the end always justifies the means. There are very few moral absolutes. Like the majority of politicians, for Bush to have a standard of absolute morality would be suicidal. Only in this climate could we have allowed President Bush to violate at least 6 United States laws, a dozen of international agreements, and going to war against Iraq. What we are witnessing in Colombia and in Washington is a complete revision of how the cocaine trade is to be run. No more wild stuff, no more blazing guns. Let the gentlemen of the Cali cartel in pinstripe suits conduct the business in a gentlemanly way. In short, Committee of 300 has taken a direct hand in the cocaine trade, which henceforth will go as smoothly as the heroin trade. The new government of Colombia is geared to the change in tactics and directions. It is on notice to perform according to the committee's game plan. There is need to mention U.S. participation in the China opium trade, which began in the southern United States prior to the war between the states. How can we tie the opium trade in with the great cotton plantations in the South? To do that, we have to start in Bengal, India. Producers of the finest, if one can call such a foul substance fine, opium, which was much in demand. Cotton was the biggest trade in England, after opium sales through the BEIC. Most of the cotton from southern plantations were worked in slave mills in northern England, where women and children earned a pittance for a 16-hour day work. The cloth mills were owned by the wealthy socialites in London, the Berrians, the Palmerstons, the Keswicks, and most of all, Jardine Matheson, who owned the Blue Star shipping line on which the finished cotton cloth goods were shipped to India. They could care less about the hapless conditions endured by Her Majesty's subjects. After all, that is what they were for, and their husbands and sons were useful for fighting wars to preserve Her Majesty's far-flung empire as they had done for centuries, and lately in the bloody Boer War, that was British tradition, wasn't it? Cotton cloth finished goods exported to India undercut and destroyed the long-standing Indian producers of cotton finished goods trade. Terrible privation was endured by thousands of Indians thrown out of work as a result of cheaper British goods taking over their markets. India then became utterly dependent upon Britain to earn enough currency to pay for its railroads, finished cotton goods imports. There was only one solution to India's economic woes: produce more opium and sell it for less than the British East India Company. This was the rock upon which British trade grew and flourished. Without its opium trade, Britain would have been as bankrupt. Did the southern plantations owners know about the ugly secret of opium for cotton goods? It is unlikely that some of them didn't know what was going on. Take, for instance, the Sutherland's family, one of the largest cotton plantations owners in the South. The Sutherlands were closely related to the Matheson family, that is Jardine Matheson, who in turn had as their business partner the Berrien brothers, founder of the famous Pensacola and Oriental Naval Lines, the P&O, the largest of British many merchant shipping lines. The Beringers were big investors in southern plantations as they were in the U.S. clipper ships, which plowed through the seas between China's ports and all the important ports along the eastern seaboard of the United States. Today, the Beringers run a number of very substantial financial operations in the United States. All of those names mentioned where their descendants still are members of the Committee of 300. The majority of families who go to make up the Eastern liberal establishment, among whom are the wealthiest to be found in this country, derive their fortune from either the cotton trade or the opium trade, and in some instances from both. Of these, the Levermans, Lehmans, are an outstanding example. When it comes to fortunes made solely from China opium trade, the first names that come to mind are the Astros, A-S-T-O-R-S, and the Delaneys. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's wife was a Delaney. John Jacob Astor made a huge fortune out of the China opium trade, and then he went respectively by buying up large tracts of Manhattan real estate with his dirty money. During his lifetime, Astor played a big role in the Committee of 300 deliberations. In fact, it was the Committee of 300 who chose who would be allowed to participate in the fabulous lucrative China opium trade through its monopolist BEIC and the beneficiaries of their largest remaining forever wedded to the Committee of 300. That is why, as we shall discover, most real estate in Manhattan belongs to various committee members, even as it has since the days when Astor began buying it up. With the benefit of access to records that would be closed to others outside of British intelligence, I discovered that Astros had long been an asset of British intelligence in the United States. Astro financing of Aaron Burr, the murderer of Alexander Hamilton, proved the point beyond any reasonable doubt. John Jacob Astor's son, Waldorf Astor, had the additional honor bestowed upon him of being appointed to the Royal Institute for International Affairs, through which organization the Committee of 300 controls every facet of our lives in the United States. The Astor family is believed to have selected Owen Lattimore to carry on their association with the opium trade, which he did through the Laura Spelman-funded Institute for Pacific Relations, the IPR, that oversaw China's entry into the opium trade as an equal partner, and not merely as a supplier. It was the IPR that paved the way for Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Attempts to turn the Japanese into opium addicts met with dismal failure. By the turn of the century, the oligarchy plutocrats of Britain were like overgorged vultures on the Serengeti plain at the time of the annual Wild Beasts March. Their income from the China opium trade exceeded David Rockefeller's income by several $1 billion per annum. Historical records made available to me in the British Museum in London and from the Indian office and other sources, former colleagues in well-placed positions, proves this completely. By 1905, the Chinese government, deeply concerned about the rise in the number of opium addicts in China, tried to get help from the international community. Britain pretended to cooperate, but made no move whatsoever to abide by the 1905 protocols it had signed. Later, Her Majesty's government did an about-face after showing China that it was better to join them in the opium business rather than try and end it. Even the Hague Convention was scoffed at by the British. Delegates of the convention had agreed that Britain must abide by the protocols it had signed, which was to drastically reduce the amount of opium sold in China and elsewhere. The British, while paying lip service, had no intention of giving up their trade in human misery, which included the so-called pig trade. Their servant, President George Bush, in prosecution of the cruel war of genocide waged against the Iraqi nation solely for and on behalf of British interests, likewise showed his contempt by flouting the Hague Agreement on aerial bombardment and whole slew of international conventions to which the U.S. is a signatory, including all the Geneva's conventions. They did that. Yeah, they did that. Yes, very much so. But that also took place under Dwight Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander in Europe, where we know that approximately 8 to 9 million German soldiers died at the Western Front, folks, not the Eastern Front, with the Western Front. When evidence was produced 2 years later, not only by the Japanese, who were growing very concerned about British smuggling of opium into their country, that opium sales had increased instead of decreased. Then Her Majesty's delegate to the Fifth Hague Convention produced a set of statistics which were at variance with those provided by Japan. The British delegate turned the tables by saying that it made a very strong case for legalizing the sale of opium, which would have the effect of doing away with what he called the black market. He suggested on behalf of Her Majesty's government that the Japanese government would then have a monopoly and full control of the trade. This is precisely the same argument being advanced by the frontmen for the Bonifans, Bonifans, Bronfmans, and other big-time dope dealers. Legalize cocaine, marijuana, and heroin, let the U.S. government have the monopoly, and thereby stop wasting billions of phony war on drugs and save the taxpayers billions of dollars. In the period of 1791 to 1894, the number of licensed opium dens in Shanghai International Settlement rose from 87 to 663, just a little over 100 years. Opium flowing into the United States was also stepped up, sensing that they might have some problems in China with the spotlight of world concerns shining upon them. The plutocrats of the Knights of St. John and the Order of Garter transferred some of their attention to Persia at that time, although it's today presently Iran. Lord Inchcape, who founded the biggest steamship company in the world at the turn of the 19th century, the legendary Peninsular and Oriental Steam Navigation Company, was the principal mover and shaker in establishing the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, which remains the largest and least controlled clearinghouse bank for the opium trade, which also financed the pig trade for the United States. The British had set up a scam whereby Chinese coolies were sent to the U.S. as so-called indentured servants or laborers. The rapacious Harriman family railroad needed coolies to push their rail connection westward to the California coast, or so they said. Strangely enough, very few Negroes were ever given the manual labor jobs that were used to at the time and could have done a better job than the emancipated opium addicts who arrived from China. The problem was that there was no market for opium among the Negroes, and moreover, Lord Inchcape, son of the founder of P&O, needed the coolies to smuggle in thousands of pounds of raw opium into North America, something the Negroes could not do. It was the same Lord Inchcape who in 1923 warned that there must be no diminishing of opium poppy cultivation in Bengal. This most important source of revenue must be safeguarded, he said. He told the commissions allergic to investigating the production of opium gum in India. By 1846, some 120,000 coolies had already arrived in the U.S. to work on Harriman's railroad pushing westward. The pig trade was in full profitable swing because of this number. It was estimated that for the U.S. government, 115,000 were opium addicts. Once the railroad was finished, the Chinese did not go back to where they came from, but settled in San Francisco, Los Angeles, in Vancouver, and in Portland. They created a huge cultural problem that has never ceased to exist. It is interesting to note that Cecil John Rhodes, a committee of 300 members who fronted for the Rothschilds in South Africa following the Inchcape pattern, bringing hundreds of thousands of Indian coolies to work on the sugarcane plantations in the Natal province in South Africa. Among them was Mahatma Gandhi, a communist agitator and troublemaker. Like the Chinese coolies, they were not returned to their countries of origin once their contracts expired. You get the point here, folks? You understand? Mahatma Gandhi, a communist agitator and troublemaker. So they were left there to be a part of this whole deal, you see, so they could expand their trade of opium. They too went on to create a massive social program, and their descendants became lawyers who spearheaded the drive to infiltrate the governments on behalf of the African National Congress. In 1875, the Chinese coolies operating out of San Francisco had set up an opium supply ring that resulted in 129,000 American opium addicts. What with the known 115,000 Chinese addicts, Lord Inchcape and his family were raking in hundreds of thousands of dollars a year from this source alone, which in terms of today's dollar would represent at least $100 million income every year. The very same British and American families who had combined to wreck the Indian textile industry and the promotion of the opium trade, and who bought African slaves to the U.S., combined to make the pig trade a valuable source of revenue. Later, they were to combine to cause and promote the terrible war between the states, also known as the American Civil War. The decadent American families of the unholy partnership, through corrupted and wallowing in filthy lucre, went on to become what we know today as the Eastern Liberal Establishment, whose members, under the careful guidance and direction of the Crown, and subsequently his foreign policy execution arm, that is, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, ran this country, and still does, from top to bottom, for their secret upper-level parallel government, which is tightly meshed with the Committee of 300, the ultimate secret society. By 1923, voices were being raised against this menace that has been allowed to be imported in the United States. Believing that the United States to be free and sovereign nation, Congressman Stephen Porter, chairman of the House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Committee, introduced a bill which called for the British to account for the opium export-import business on a country-by-country basis. The resolution set up quotas for each country, which, if observed, would have reduced the opium made by 10%. The resolution was passed into law and the bill accepted by the Congress of the United States. But the Royal Institute of International Affairs had other ideas. That is, it was founded in 1919 in the wake of the Paris Peace Conference held at Versailles. This was one of the earliest foreign policy executors of the Committee of 300. So are you seeing the picture here? This is about also the same time that the Tavistock Institute is involved here too. Very close to this. Research I have done on the congressional records, House showed that Porter was totally unaware of the powerful force he was up against. Porter was not even aware of the existence of the RIA, much less that its specific purpose was to control every facet of the United States. Apparently, Congressman Porter received some kind of intimidated from the Morgan Bank of Wall Street that he should drop the whole affair. Instead, an enraged Porter took his case to the League of Nations Opium Committee. Porter's total unawareness of who he was up against is demonstrated in some of his correspondence to colleagues in the House Foreign Affairs Committee in response to the open British opposition to his proposal. Her Majesty represented child, Porter, and then acting like a father towards the heir and son, the British delegate, on instructions for the RIA, presented Her Majesty's proposal to increase opium quotas to account for the increase in consumption of opium for medical purposes. According to documents that I was able to find in The Hague, Porter was at first confused, then amazed, and then enraged. Joined by the Chinese delegate, Porter stormed out of the plenarian session of the committee session, leaving the field to the British. In his absence, the British delegate got the League to rubber stamp Her Majesty's government proposal for a creation of a tame tiger Central Narcotics Board, whose chief function was to information gathering, the terms of which were purportedly vague. What was to be done with the information was never made clear. Porter returned to U.S. a shaken and much wiser man. Another British intelligence asset was the fabulous rich William Binghamton, into which family one of the Barringtons married. It was stated in papers and documents that I saw that the Barrington brothers ran the Philadelphia Quakers. Wow. And owned half of the real estate of that city, all made possible because of the fortune the Barrington brothers had amassed from the China opium trade. Another beneficiary of the Committee of 300 largest was Stephen Girard, whose descendants inherited the Girard Bank and Trust. That's Girard. The names of the families whose history is intertwined with that of Boston and who would never give up ordinary folk at the time of day were wrapped in the arms of the Committee of 300 and its vastly lucrative BEIC, China opium trade. Many of the famous families became associated with the notorious Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, which is still the clearinghouse for billions of dollars that flow from the opium trade in China. Such famous names as the Fords, the Perkins, and Hathaways appear in the records of the British East India Company. These genuine American blue bloods created Russell and Company. That's Russell and Company, whose main trade was in opium, but also ran other shipping enterprises from China to South America and all points in between. As a result, as a reward for their services to the British Crown, the BEIC, Committee of 300 granted them monopoly in the slave trade in 1833. See how this is connected, folks? Boston owes its celebrated past to the Boston owes its celebrated past to the cotton, opium-slave trade granted to it by the Committee of 300, and is stated in the records I was privileged to see in London that Boston's merchants' families were the chief supporters of the British Crown in the United States. John Murray Forbes is mentioned as the majordomo of the Boston Blue Bloods in India House records and in bank records in Hong Kong. Forbes' son was the first American allowed by the Committee of 300 to sit on the board of the most prestigious drug bank in the world, even today, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank. When I was in Hong Kong in the early 1960s as a historian interested in the British East India Company, I was shown some old records, including past board members of this notorious drug bank. And sure enough, Forbes' name was among them. The Perkins family so illustrated that their name is still mentioned in awe whispers were deeply involved in the nefarious, filthy China opium trade. In fact, Perkins the elder was one of the first Americans to be elected to the Committee of 300. His son, Thomas Nelson, was Morgan's man in Boston, as such also agent for British intelligence. His unsavory, I would say, disgusting past was not in question when he richly endowed Harvard University. After all, Canton and Tennyson are a long way from Boston, and who would have cared anyway? What helped the Perkinses a lot was that Morgan was a powerful member of the Committee of 300, which enabled Thomas N. Perkins to rapidly further his career in China opium trade. All the Morgans and the Perkinses were Freemasons, which was another tie that bound them together, for only Freemasons of highest rank have any hope of being selected by the Committee of 300. So Robert Hart, who for almost 3 decades was chief of the Imperial Chinese Customs Service, that is, read the British Crown, #1 agent in the opium trade in China, was subsequently appointed to the board of Morgan's Guarantee Bank Far Eastern Division. Let's continue here. 37 minutes, so we'll continue. Through access to the historical records in London and Hong Kong, I was able to establish that Sir Robert developed an intimate relationship with Morgan operations in the United States. It is worthy of note that Morgan's interest in the opium/heroin trade had continued in an unbroken line. Witness the fact that David Binghamton is on the advisory board of Morgan's Hong Kong operation run in conjunction with Jardine Matheson. Those who know Hong Kong, the name of Binghamton will be familiar as the most powerful name in Hong Kong. In addition to his membership of Morgan's elite bank, Binghamton doubles as advisor to the Chinese government. Opium for missile technology. Hear that? Opium for missile technology, opium for gold, opium for high-tech computers is all the same in Binghamton. So this is what's traded for, folks. Technology. This is why China has rapidly ascended here in the last 30 years or 40 years, folks. Ladies' banks, financial houses, trading companies, and the families who run them are intertwined with perplexed, even Sherlock Holmes. Yet somehow they must be unraveled and followed if we are to understand their connections with the drug trade and their membership in the Committee of 300. The two-track entry in the United States of alcohol and drugs were products of the same stable occupied by the same thoroughbreds. First, prohibition had to be introduced in the United States. This was done by the British East India Company, Harris, who, acting upon experience gained through the well-documented China Inland Mission record found in India's house, set up the Women's Christian Temperance Union. See, they set these groups up. See, unbelievable. Just like they did with the China Inland Missions, same thing. Supposedly to oppose consumption of alcohol in America. We say that America repeats itself. In a sense, this is true, except that it repeats itself in an ever upward spiral. Today, we find that some of the largest companies allegedly polluting the earth are the largest contributors of funds to the environmental movements. Correct. Correct. That is correct. The WW Worldwide um, Fund is mainly, a lot of that money comes from the Windsors in England. The big names sent forth their message. Prince Philip is one of their heroes. Yet his son, Prince Charles, owns 1,000,000 acres of forest land in Wales from which timber is regularly harvested. In addition, Prince Charles is one of the largest owners of slum housing in London, where pollution thrives. They don't care, folks. They don't care. They're the bottom of the rung. In the case of those who rail against the evil of drink, we find that they were financed by the Astros, the Rockefellers, the Spelmans, the Vanderbilts, and the Warburgs, who had a vested interest in the liquor trade. On the instructions of the Crown, Lord Beaverbrook came over from England to tell these wealthy American families that they were to invest into the WCTU. It was the same Lord Beaverbrook who came to Washington in 1940 and ordered Roosevelt to get involved in Britain's war. Roosevelt complied by stationing a U.S. Navy flotilla in Greenland that spent the 9 months prior to the Pearl Harbor hunting and attacking German U-boats. Most people don't know this, folks. There's no war been declared here. You see, there's no wars that's even happened. But yet, our Navy is involved in Greenland that spends the 9 months prior to Pearl Harbor that is being attacked, hunting and attacking German U-boats. There was no declaration of war. Like his successors, George Bush, Roosevelt, through the Congress's confounded nuisance, so acting like a king since he felt strongly since he is related to the British royal family. FDR never sought the permission of Congress for his legal action. This is what the British are most fond of referring to as their special relationship with America. Yeah, most people don't know this. I mean, I doubt even one person in a million knows this. The drug trade has a connection with the murder of President John F. Kennedy, which foul deed stains the national character and will continue to do so until the perpetrators are found and brought to justice. There is proof that the mafia was involved in this through the CIA, which brings to mind that it's all started with the old Meyer-Lansky network, which evolved into the Ingrid terrorism organization. Remember those that was involved in Israel, and Lansky proved to be one of the best vehicles for peddling cultural warfare against the West. Lansky was to most respectable fronts associated with the British higher-ups in bringing gambling and dope distribution to Paradise Island in the Bahamas under the cover of the Mary Carter Paint Company, a joint Lansky-British MI6 venture. Lord Sassoon was later murdered because he was skimming money and was threatening to blow the whistle if he was punished. Ray Wolf was more presentable, representing the Bonifants of Canada. While the Bonifants were not privy to the Churchill Massacre Nova Scotia project, they were and still are nevertheless an important asset to the British royal family in the business of dope peddling. Sam Rothenberg, that's Rothberg, close associate of Meyer Lansky, also worked with the Tibor Rosenbaum and Pinchas Sapir, all kingpins in the Lansky drug ring. Rosenbaum ran a drug money laundering operation out of Switzerland through a bank he established for this purpose. Bank of the Credito International, we know it as BCI, which is in trouble right now, folks. I don't know if you're keeping up with that. Some major things have happened late last year with this particular bank, and they're losing money. The bank quickly expanded its activities and became the principal bank used by Langston and his mobster associates for laundering money garnered from prostitution, drugs, and other mafia rackets. It's worthy of note that Mr. Rosenberg's bank was used by the shadowy chief of British intelligence, that is Sir William Stevenson, whose right-hand man, Major John Mortimer Broomfield, a Canadian citizen, ran Division 5 of the FBI throughout the Second World War. Stevenson was an early member of the 20th Century Committee of 300, although Bloomfield never made it that far. As I revealed in my series of monograms on the Kennedy assassination, it was Stevenson who masterminded the operation, which was run as a hands-on project by Broomfield. Fronting for the Kennedy assassination was done through another drug-related front, Permanent Industrial Expositions, PERMINDEX, created in 1957 and created a World Trade Market building in downtown New Orleans. Bloomfield just happened to be the attorney for the Bronfman family. The world trademark was created by the Colonel Clay Shaw and the FBI Division 5 Station Chief in New Orleans. Guy Bannister. Shaw and Bannister were close associates of Lee Harvey Oswald, accused of shooting Kennedy, who was murdered by the CIA contract against Jack Ruby, where he could prove that he was not the assassin who shot President Kennedy. In spite of the Warren Commission and numerous official reports, it has never been established that Oswald owned the Manichee rifle said to be the murder weapon. It was not, nor that he had ever fired it. The connection between the drug trade, Shaw, Bannister, and Broomfield have been established several times and need not concern us here. In the immediate post-World War II period, one of the most common methods used by the Resorts International and other drug-related companies to clean money was by courier service to a money laundering bank. Not all that has changed. Only the small fry still uses some risky methods. The big fish conduit their money via the CHIPS system, CHIPS, capital CHIPS system, acronym for Clearinghouse International Payment System, run by the Burroughs Computer System centered at the New York Clearinghouse. 12 of the largest banks use this system. One of them is in Hong Kong, known as Shanghai Bank. Another is CSI, Credit Suisse, that is also so respectable paradigm of virtue in banking until the lid is lifted. Combined with the SWIFT system based in Virginia, dirty drug money becomes invisible. Only wandering, careless results in the FBI get lucky now and then if and when it is told not to look the other way. Only low echelon drug dealers get caught with drug money in their hands. The elite, such as Drexel Burnham, Credit Suisse, Hong Kong, and Shanghai Bank, escape detection. And Drexel Burnham is a investment company at one time. I don't know if it is now. But this too is changing with the collapse of Bank of Credit and Commercial International, BCCI, which is likely to expose a great deal about the drug trade if ever properly investigated is carried out. One of the largest aspects of portfolios of the Committee of 300 Companies in American Express is President regularly occupied positions on the Committee of 300. First got interested in American Express when I was carrying out an on-the-spot investigation that led me to the Trade Development Bank in Geneva. Later, this got me into a lot of trouble. I discovered that the Trade Development Bank, then run by Edwin Sarford, key man in the gold for opium trade, was supplying tons of gold to the Hong Kong market via Trade Development Bank. Before going to Switzerland, I went to Pretoria, South Africa, where I talked with Dr. Chris Stalls, at that time the Deputy Governor of the South Africa's Reserve Bank, which controls all bulk dealings in South African produced gold. After several discussions over a period of a week, I was told that the bank could not supply me with the 10 tons of gold that I was authorized to buy on behalf of clients I was supposed to be representing. My friends in the right places knew how to produce the documentation, which passed without question. The Reserve Bank referred me to the Swiss company, whom I cannot name because it would blow cover. I was also given the address of Trade Development Bank in Geneva. The purpose of my exercise was to find out the mechanics of how gold is moved and traded, and secondly, to test bogus documents which have been prepared for me by ex-intelligent friends of mine who specialize in this kind of thing. You remember M in the James Bond series. Let me assure you that M does exist, only his correct initial is C. Documents I have consisted of buying orders from Liechtenstein companies with supporting papers to match. Again, Liechtenstein is another country. It's a kingdom almost, basically, just like Luxembourg and Andorra in Europe. Luxembourg, there's Liechtenstein, and I think there's one other country, but I always get them confused. I'd have to look at a map. But I think Liechtenstein is the one that's near between the South German border with the Austrian border. I could be wrong, so don't hold me to that. On approaching Trade Development Bank, I was at first greeted cordially, but as discussions progressed with more and more suspicious until when I felt it was no longer safe for me to visit the bank without telling anyone at the bank I left Geneva. Later, the bank was sold to American Express. American Express was briefly investigated by former Attorney General Edwin Meese, which was under the Reagan administration, after which he was quickly removed from office and labeled corrupt. Wow. What I found was that American Express was and still is a conduit for laundering drug money, and thus far no one has been able to explain to me why a private company has the right to print dollars. Aren't American Express traveler checks dollars? Yes, they are. Essentially, I suppose the South America Amex, that is American Express, drug connection, which upset a lot of people, as one can be imagined. Let's continue. The members of the Committee of 300 members, Jaffel controls Charterhouse Jaffel, which in turn controls Jardine Matheson as a direct link to the Hong Kong opium trade. Jaffels are reportedly English Quakers. The Madison family, also members of the Committee of 300, were kingpins of the China opium trade, at least up until 1943. The Mathesons have appeared in the Queen of England's honors list since the early 19th century. The top controllers of the drug trade in the Committee of 300 had no conscience about the millions of lives they ruin each year. They are Gnostics, Cathars, members of the cult of Dionysus, Osiris, or worse. To them, ordinary people are there to be used for their purpose. Their high priestess, such as Aldous Huxley and Buckworth Langton, preach the gospel of drugs as a beneficial substance. To quote Huxley, this is what he says, and for private everyday use, there have always been chemical toxins. All the vegetable sedatives and narcotics, all the euphorbias that grow on trees, hallucinations that ripen in berries have been used by humans since time immemorial. And to these modifiers of consciousness, modern science has added this quota of synthetics. For unrestricted use, the West has permitted only alcohol and tobacco. All other chemicals doers in the wall are labeled dope. He's kind of making an excuse here. That is, Huxley is, as though the people went after these sedatives. Well, it didn't cost him an arm and a leg, Huxley. You know, you see, it also didn't make money for others, you see. To the oligarchs and the plutocrats of the Committee of 300, drugs have a twofold purpose. Firstly, to bring in colossal sums of money, and second, to eventually turn a major part of the population into mindless, wow, here's interesting, mindless drug zombies who will be easier to control than people who don't need drugs. You're right about that one, baby. You're right about that one. As punishment for rebellion will mean withholding of supplies of heroin, cocaine, and marijuana, etc. This is necessary to legalize drugs so that a monopoly state or system which has been ready for introduction. One severe economic condition of which the 1991 Depression is the forerunner caused drug usage to proliferate as hundreds of thousands of permanent jobless workers turned to drugs for solace. Yeah, we know that even during this whole thing with COVID here, folks, the alcohol stores were open in order for them to deal with the issue. In one of the Royal Institute of International Affairs top secret papers, the scenario is laid out as follows, in part, having been failed by Christianity and with unemployment on every hand, those who have been without jobs for 5 years or more will turn away from the church and seek solace in drugs. That is when full control of the drug trade must be completed in order that the governments of all countries who are under our jurisdiction will have a monopoly, which we will control through supply. Drug bars will take care of the unruly, and the discontent would be revolutionaries, will be turned into harmless addicts with no will of their own. There's ample evidence that the CIA and British intelligence, especially MI6, have already spent at least a decade working towards this goal. The Royal Institute of International Affairs used the lifetime work of Aldous Huxley and Buckworth Langton as its blueprint to bring about a state where mankind will no longer have wills of their own in the one world government, new world order of the fast approaching new dark age. Again, let us see what high priest Aldous Huxley had to say about this. In many societies at many levels of civilization, attempts have been made to fuse drug intoxication with God intoxication. In ancient Greece, for example, ethical alcohol had its place in established religion. Dionysus, Bacchus, as he was often called, was a true divinity. Complete prohibition of chemical changes can be decreed but cannot be enforced. The language of the pro-drug lobby on Capitol Hill. Now let us consider another type of drug, still undiscovered, but probably just around the corner. A drug making people happy in a situation where they would normally feel miserable Is there anyone more miserable than a person who has sought and been unable to find work? Such a drug would be a blessing, but a blessing fraught with grave social and political dangers. By making a harmless chemical euphoria freely available, as for a dictator, read Committee of 300, could reconcile the entire population to a state of affairs to which self-respecting human beings ought not to be reconciled. Quite a dialectic masterpiece. What Huxley was advocating, and which is off the official policy of the Committee of 300 and its surrogate, the RIIA, can be quite simply stated in mass mind control. This all goes in, this ties in with Tavistock. He knows that. He understands this whole, he doesn't mention Tavistock here, but he is explaining this, that you can see how it fits here, it's congruent. As I have often said, all wars are wars for the souls of mankind. Thus far, it has not dawned on us that the drug trade is a regularly low-intensive warfare against the whole human race of free men. Correct. It is very much against, it's to keep you from going, there are people who act, I don't know, there are people who say they have spiritual experiences based upon drugs. I wonder about that, folks. I really wonder. Irregular warfare is the most terrible form of warfare which, while it has a beginning, has no ending. Some will question the involvement of the British royal families, past and present, in the drug trade. To see it in print appears on the surface to be preposterous, and being seen in prints more often these days to make it appear exactly that, preposterous. The oldest maxim in the intelligent business is, if you want to hide something, put it where everyone can see it. F.S. Turner's book, British Opium Policy, published in 1876, shows how the British monarchy and its hanger-on families' relatives were deeply involved in the opium trade. Turner was the secretary of the Anglo-Oriental Society of Suppression of the Opium Trade. He declined to be silenced by Crown spokesperson Sir R. Temple. Turner stated to the government, therefore, the Crown had to withdraw from the opium monopoly, and if it takes any revenues at all, take only that which accrues from taxation, honestly meant to have a restrictive force. Turner was answered by a spokesperson from the monarchy, Lord Lawrence, who fought against the BEIC, losing its monopoly. It would be desirable to get rid of the monopoly, but I myself am disinclined to be the agent of change. If it is a question of moderate loss that we could afford, I would not hesitate to undertake it. Taking from the Calcutta Papers in 1870. By 1874, the war against the British monarchy and the aristocrats over its deep involvement in the China opium trade was getting heated. The Society for the Suppression of Opium Trade violently assailed the aristocrats of the day and pressed home its attacks in a fearless manner we would do well to emulate. The society said that the Treaty of Tenjinsten, which forced China to accept the importation of an enormous amount of opium, was a dastardly crime against the Chinese people. There arose a mighty warrior named Joseph Grundy Alexander, a barrister by profession, who in 1866 led a strong attack on the British Crown opium policy in China, in which he openly mentioned the involvement of the royal family and the aristocrats. For the first time, Alexander brought India, the jewel in the crown, into the picture. He laid the blame squarely where it belongs, on the monarchy, the so-called aristocrats, and its servants in the British government. Under the direction of Alexander, the society committed itself to the total destruction of cultivation of opium poppies in Bengal, India. Alexander proved to be a doughty opponent. Through his leadership, the drug aristocrats began to falter, and in the face of his open denouncements of the royal family and its hangers-on, several members of parliament began sliding with him, conservatives, unions, labor. Alexander made it clear that the drug trade was not a party political issue. It was for all parties to join together in helping to eradicate this menace. Lord Kimberley, spokesman for the royal family and the entrenched oligarchs, threatened that any attempts to interfere with what he called the commerce of the nation will run into serious opposition from the cabinet. Alexander and his society pressed on in the face of innumerable threats, and finally Parliament agreed to appoint a royal commission to inquire in the opium trade with Lord Kimberley, who was the Secretary of India, as its chairman, a more inappropriate person to head the commission. Oh, wonder. Yeah, definitely a most inappropriate person to head the commission could not have been found. He was akin to Dulles being the appointment to the Warren Commission, folks. See how they do this. In his first statement, Lord Kimberley made it clear that he would rather resign from his august position than consent to a resolution that would surrender India opium revenues. It's worthy of note that the Indian opium revenue implied money shared by the nation, like the idea that the people of South Africa share the enormous profits from the sale of gold and diamonds. This was just not the case, though. India opium revenues went straight into the royal coffers and the pockets of nobility and the oligarchs and the plutocrats and make them billionaires. Rotree's book, that's spelled Rowntreee book, The Imperial Drug Trade, gives a fascinating account of how Prime Minister Gladstone and his fellow plutocrats lied, cheated, twisted, and turned to keep the astounding truth of the involvement of the British monarchy in the opium trade from being exposed. Rotree's book is a treasure house of information on the deep involvement of the British royal family and the lords and ladies of England, and the huge fortunes they accumulated from the misery of Chinese opium addicts. Lord Kimberley, Secretary of the Commission of Inquiry, was himself deeply involved in the opium trade, so he did everything in his power to close the proceedings to all who sought the truth. Finally, on a great deal of pressure from the public, the Royal Commission was forced to open the door to this inquiry just a crack, that is, so that it became apparent that the highest in land were running the opium trade and receiving huge benefits from it. But the door was quickly slammed shut again, and the Royal Commission called no expert witnesses. Thereafter, sitting for a short period of time, the commission was nothing but a farce and a cover-up, such as we have become accustomed to in 20th century America. The Eastern liberal establishment families of the United States were justly as deeply involved in the China opium trade as were the British. Indeed, they still are. Witness recent history when James Earl Carter topped the Shah of Iran. Why was the Shah disposed and then murdered by the United States government? In a word, because of drugs. The Shah had clamped down and virtually put an end to the immense lucrative opium trade being conducted out of Iran by the British. At the time that the Shah took over in Iran, there were already 1 million opium heroin addicts. This the British would not tolerate, so they sent the United States to do their dirty work, as usual, you see, but them in terms of their special relationship between the two countries. When Khomeini took over the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, arms sales by the United States, which had begun with the Shah, were not discontinued. Why not? Had the United States done so, Khomeini would have counseled the British monopoly of the opium trade in his country. To prove the point, after 1984, Khomeini's liberal attitude towards opium had increased the number of addicts to 2 million people, according to the United Nations and World Health Organization statistics. So see, this Anatolia, Khomeini didn't actually do what we thought he was, you see. Well, President Carter and his successor, Ronald Reagan, willingly and with full knowledge of what was at stake, went on supplying arms to Iran even while American hostages languished in captivity. In 1980, I wrote a monogram under the title, What Really Happened in Iran, which sets out the facts. The arms trade with Iran was sealed at a meeting between Cyrus Vance, a servant of the Committee of 300, and Dr. Hashemi, Hashemi, which resulted in the U.S. Air Force beginning an immediate airlift of arms to Iran, carried on even after the height of the hostage crisis. The arms came from the U.S. Army stockpiles in Germany, and some were even flown directly from the United States with refueling stops at the Azores. With the advent of Khomeini, who was put in power in Iran by the Committee of 300, unbelievable. So he was brought in by the power of the Committee of 300. Opium production skyrocketed. By 1984, Iran's opium production exceeded 650 metric tons of opium per annum. What Carter Reagan did was ensure that there was no further interference in the opium trade, and they carried out the mandate given to them by the oligarchy families in Britain in the connection. Iran presently rivals the Golden Triangle in the volume of opium produced. The Shah was not the only was not the only victim of the Committee of 300. William Buckley, a CIA station chief in Beirut, and all of his lack of experience on who is behind the opium trade, began conducting investigations in Iran, Lebanon, and even spent time in Pakistan from Islamabad. Buckley began sending back damning reports to the CIA Langley again about the burgeoning opium trade in the Golden Crescent in Pakistan. The U.S. Embassy in Islamabad was firebombed, but Buckley escaped the mob attack and returned to Washington because his cover was blown by forces unknown. This is a very strange thing happened. Contrary to all procedures laid down by CIA when an agent cover has been blown, Buckley was sent back to Beirut. Buckley was in effect sentenced to death by the CIA in order to silence him. This time, the sentence was carried out. William Buckley was kidnapped by agents of the Committee of 300 under brutal interrogations by General Mohammed el-Kahoui of Syrian intelligence to force him to disclose the names of all field officers of the DA in these countries. He was brutally murdered, folks. His efforts to expose the huge opium trade developments out of Pakistan, Lebanon, and Iran cost him his life. There are a few people who have the guts to do this, folks. I don't know if Buckley really actually knew. Basically, what I gathered from what he's sharing here, he was basically kind of what I would call wet. Had wet ears, so to speak. Didn't have any experience, but he sought out to find out what was really going on. He lost his life based upon this, and apparently he was brutally killed. And they, naturally, when you discover like this in Pakistan, you never send the guy back out. That is correct. You don't send him back out because he's a sitting duck. And the remaining free men in this world believe that single-handedly or in small groups they can smash the drug trail. They are sorely mistaken. They could cut off the tentacles of the opium and cocaine trade here and there, but never the head. The crown cobras of Europe and the Eastern liberal establishment families will not tolerate it. The war on drugs, which the Bush administration is allegedly fighting, which is not, is from total legalization of all types of classes of drug. Such drugs are not solely a social aberration, but a full-scale attempt to gain control of the minds of the people of this planet, or as the Aquarian conspiracy author puts it, to bring about a radical change in the United States. This is a principal task of the Committee of 300, the ultimate secret society. Nothing has changed in the opium, heroin, cocaine trade. It's still run by the same upper-class families of Britain and the United States. It's still a fabulous, profitable trade where what seems to be big losses through seizures by the authorities are written off in panel boardrooms in New York, Hong Kong, and London over port and cigars is merely the cost of doing business the old boy way. The British colonial capitalism has always been the mainstay of the oligarchy feudal system of privilege in England and remains so to this present day. When the poor, untutored, pastored people in South Africa who became known as the Boers fell into the blood-stained hands of the British aristocrats in 1899. They had no idea that the revolving cruel world, so relentlessly pursued by the Queen Victoria, was financed by the incredible amounts of money which came from the instant fortunes of the BEIC opium trade in China in the pockets of the plutocrats. And I've read parts of this whole thing. I actually didn't read it. I've watched a movie about it. And, Winston Churchill was there too. And I keep saying this because I want people to understand the Germans, the Russians were not the ones who created the concentration camps, folks. The concentration camps were created by the British. That's a fact. They're the ones who did it. They're the ones that started it. The British were the ones that did it, not the Russians and not the Germans at first. We've been lied to about everything as though Britain is such a great little country. You ever ask yourself how this little island of that nature could actually control almost the whole world? Think about it, folks. That's impossible unless it's using other surrogates all along. But it's been used in the United States for over 200 years, you see. So this is what happens. They had plenty of money. The other thing is simply this was a major war, folks. This is a major undertaking because all this stuff was delivered by ship. The army, the weapons, the food, everything was shipped in by ship. and crossed in and went into the inner lands for the British. Even the water sometimes was shipped from that way. In fact, I know that certain battles the British were already in trouble with. They didn't have enough water for the men to fight, that is, for drinking water. But they decided to put women and children in concentration camps. Don't tell me the British are great people, especially the aristocrats. They're the bottom of the rung, too. People need to know this, strictly need to know this. How? So that's why the South Africans, the Boers, that is the Afrikaners, gave in. They were beating the British, you see. A dastardly trick, probably by Winston Churchill, although that idea came from somebody else. Let's continue. Committee of 300 members, Cecil John Rose, Barney Barnetto, and Alfred Beta investigated an engineer of the war. Rhodes was the principal agent for Rothschilds, whose banks were awash in cash flowing from the opium trade. These robbers, thieves, and liars, Rhodes, Barnetto, Oppenheimer, Joel, and Bailey, dispossessed the South African Boers of their birthright, the gold and diamonds that lay beneath their soil. The South African Boers received nothing out of billions upon billions of dollars derived from the sale of their gold and diamonds. I dare you, piece of shits. You are shit. That's what you are. And Cecil Rhodes is a piece of garbage. These people do anything. You got to have a little righteous anger here, folks. You don't see the whole thing. You have to say something and say, this is not right. No matter no one ever cares, that doesn't matter. You still put up a flashlight or whatever, speak the truth and say, you people are the maggots. You're the problem. You created this problem. But the other problems, I would say simply, is the people took these drugs too, you see. They're too dumbfounded to understand they're basically being used also. There would be no sale of drugs if there was no customers, folks. Why don't you stop doing it? Why don't you stop it? Have some courage in your life and say, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. This would all end if you stop it. They couldn't sell anything of that. You said no to it. So it's part of your responsibility too. It's not just them. You've got to have guts. You've got to stand against the system. So the Committee of 300 quickly took full control of these vast treasures, control which it even now maintains through one of its members, Sir Harry Oppenheimer. They always call themselves Sir. They're not any sirs, folks. You know, same thing they say, Your Honor, here in the United States, as some quote unquote congressman or quote unquote judge. There's no honor in them, folks. Why would you have to put something in front of them though to tell them that there's some kind of honorable person when in reality they're not honorable? It's the opposite. The average South African receives $100 per annum per capita from the gold and diamond industry. The billions which flow out actually annually go to the bankers of the Committee of 300 is one of the most foul and vile stories of greed, theft, and murder of a nation ever recorded in the annals of history. How could the British Crown have succeeded in pulling off this stunning fraud of gigantic proportions? To accomplish such a Hercules task, you see, required skill organizing, which devoted agents in place to carry out the daily instructions passed down from the conspiracy hierarchy. The first step was a press propaganda campaign portraying the Boers as uncivilized barbarians. They always do this. They always do this. They tell these people they're stupid. Oh, the Iraqis, they're half human. Bullshit. You're a half human. Only slightly human, you see. So the American public, oh, they're subhuman. They're not human. When in reality, they are human. They have blood just like you and me. It bleeds red. who were denying British citizens the right to vote in the Boer Republic. Then demands were made of Paul Kruger, leader of the Transvaal Republic, which of course could not be met. After that, a series of incidents were staged to provoke the Boers into retaliation. But that didn't work either. Then came the infamous Jameson Raid, where a certain Jameson led a party of several hundred armed men in an attack on the Transvaals. War followed immediately thereafter, though. So you always want to start something. Queen Victoria mounted the largest and best equipped army that the world has ever seen at that time in 1898. Victoria thought through her war would be over in 2 weeks. Didn't last that way, did it? Since the Boers had no standing army and no trained militia, it would be no match for her 400,000 soldiers drawn from the ranks of British underclass. The Boers never number more than 80,000 farmers and their sons. So these are people who are farmers, folks. Some were as young as 14 years old. Rudyard Kipling also thought the war would be over in less than a week also. Instead, with a rifle in one hand and the Bible in the other, the Boers held out for 3 years. We went to South Africa thinking the war would be over in a week, said Kipling. Instead, the Boers taught us no end of a lesson. That same lesson could be taught to the Committee of 300 today if we could but muster 10,000 leaders, good men and true to lead the nation in battle against the gargantuan monster threatening to devour everything our Constitution stands for. After the war ended in 1902, the British Crown had to consolidate its grip on the unimaginable fortune of gold and diamonds that lay beneath the burying field of the Boers Republic, the Transvaal, and the Orange Free State. This was done through the Round Table of the legend of King Arthur and his kingdom, knights. The Round Table is strictly a British MI6 intelligence operation established by the Committee of 300, which together with the Rhodes Scholarship Program is a dagger in the heartland of America. The Round Tree was established in South Africa by Cecil Rhodes, who, funded by the English Rothschild family, its purpose was to train business leaders loyal to the British Crown who would secure the vast gold and diamond treasures for the British Crown. South Africans had the birthright stolen from them in a coup so massive and all-prevailing that it would apparently only a central unified command could have pulled it off. That unified command was the Committee of 300. That this was accomplished is not in dispute. By the early 1930s, the British Crown had a staggering stranglehold on the biggest supply of gold and diamonds ever found in the world. Now the Committee of 300 had at its disposal both the vast fortunes coming from the drug trade and the equally vast fortunes for the minerals and metal wealth of South Africa. Financial control of the world was complete. The Round Table played a pivotal role in the coup. The express purpose of the Round Table, after swallowing up South Africa, was to blunt the benefits to the United States of America's war on independence, and once more bring the United States under British control. Organizing ability was essential for such enterprises was provided by Lord Alfred Milner, protege of the London Rothschild family. Using Scots Rite Freemason principles and selecting members of the Round Table, chosen underwent a period of intense training at Cambridge and Oxford University under the watchful eyes of John Ruskin, a self-confessed old-school communist, and T.H. Green, operative in MI6. It was Green, the son of a Christian evangelical cleric, who fought Rhodes, Milner, John William Bennett, A.D. Lindsay, George Bernard Shaw. That's right, George Bernard Shaw. So many people put on a pedestal. And Hartmut Shaw, Hitler's financial minister. I pause here to remind readers that the Round Table is only one sector of the vast and all-encompassing Committee of 300. Yet the Round Table itself consists of a mass of companies, institutions, banks, and educational establishments, which in itself would take qualified insurance actually a year to sort out. Round Tablers fanned out throughout the world to take control of fiscal and monetary policies and political leadership in all countries where they operate. In South Africa, General Smuts, who fought against the British in the Boer War, was turned and became a leading British intelligence, military, and political agent who espoused the cause of the British Crown. In the United States' later years, the task of boring away at the United States from the inside fell to William Yandell Elliott, the man who spotted Henry Kissinger, and he was responsible for the meteoric rise to power as chief U.S. advisor to the Committee of 300. William Yandell Elliott was an American at Oxford who had already served the Committee of 300 well, which is a prerequisite for higher office in the service of the committee. After graduating from Vanderbilt University in 1917, Elliott was drafted by the Rothschild-Warburg banking network. He worked at the Federal Reserve Bank in San Francisco and rose to be a director. From there, he acted as Warburg's Rothschild's intelligence officer, reporting on the important areas of the United States he was overseeing. Elliott's Freemason talent spotters recommended him for a Rhodes Scholarship, and in 1924, he went to, I don't know how to pronounce this, Balloch College at Oxford University, whose dreaming spires had hid a network of intrigue and future traders to the west. Ballard College was and still is the center of recruiting for the Round Table. Let's see, we got back over here. After a thorough brainwashing conducted by the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations Representative A.D. Lindsay, that succeeded Master Ballot T.H. Green, Elliott was received in the Round Table and sent to the Royal Institute of International Affairs to be given his assignment, which was that he returned to the United States to become the leader in Academia Committee. The Round Table driving philosophy was to have round tables in position to formulate and carry out social policies through social institutions whereby what Ruskin called the masses could be manipulated. And that's what's occurring right in front of our eyes right now, folks. Members infiltrated the highest levels of banking after undergoing a course at Tavistock Institute. The course was drawn up by the Lord Leconfield, spelled Leconfield, an intimate of the British royal family, and later run by Robert Brand, who went on to manage Lossar Faries. The Royal Institute of International Affairs was and remains totally interfaced with the British monarchy. Remember, the CFR is actually the Council for Foreign Relations is under the Royal Institute of International Affairs. They call the shots. The CFR is just a student of it, so to speak. Some of the spin-offs of the Round Table are the Bilderberg, set up and run by Duncan Sanders, a prominent politician and son-in-law of the late Winston Churchill. The Ditchley Foundation, a secret banking club, which I exposed in my 1983 work called International Bankers Conspiracy, the Ditchley Foundation, the Trilateral Commission, the Atlantic Council on the United States, and the Aspen Institute for Humanities Studies. The Aspen Institute for Humanistic Studies, whose well-written, hidden behind-the-scenes founder was Lord Bullock of the RII, for whom Robert Anderson fronted. The way in which Henry Kissinger, the RIIA chief asset in the United States, came to power is a story of triumph of the Institute of the British monarchy over the Republic of the United States of America. It's a tale of horror too long to be included here. Nevertheless, it would be remiss of me if I did not mention just a few of the highlights of Kissinger's rise to fame, fortune, and power. After a stint in the United States Army, beginning with the job of driving General Fritz Krömer around war-torn Germany, thanks to the Oppenheim family, Kissinger was picked to attend Wilton Park for further training. At that time, he held the rank of a private first class. In 1952, Kissinger was sent to the Tavistock Institute, where R.B. Dix took him in hand and turned him inside out, folks. Thereafter, there was no holding Kissinger back. He was later drafted to serve under George Franklin and Hamilton Fish of the Council on Foreign Relations in New York. It is believed that the official nuclear policy adopted by the United States was delivered to Kissinger during his stay at Tavistock and further shaped by his participation in nuclear weapons and foreign policy. A roundtable seminar which brought forth the doctrine known as flexible response, total irrationality, which became known by the acronym of MAD. We talked about that in political science back in the 80s. Mutual assured destruction. What it meant simply is that each side cannot afford to shoot nuclear weapons at each other because in reality, both sides would be both destroyed. Well, there's a little problem with that, folks. Russia has what I would call a great place where they have civil defense. And so there's plenty of places for them to hide underneath the earth unlike here in America, because there's nothing here for the Americans here, period. The civil defense was actually abandoned probably in the mid-60s, I'm guessing. I'll have to look at that up. Thanks to William Yandell Elliott, under the tutelage of John Wheeler Bennett, top intelligence director of the Round Table and chief of MI6 field operations in the United States, Kistner became Elliott's favorite son, as he explained him in his book, Pragmatic Revolt in Politics. Kistner was co-opted into the Round Table to push monetarist policies he studied at Harvard International Seminars. Kistner avidly absorbed Elliott's teachings and was no longer recognizable as the man General Kramer once described as my little Jew boy driver. Kistner was inculcated with the spirit of the master of Balliol, becoming an ardent disciple of the decadent British aristocrats, adopting the philosophies of Toynbee, chief intelligence director for MI6 at Royal Institute of International Affairs. Kistner used his papers to write his undergraduate dissertation. By the mid-1960s, Kistner had proved his work to the Round Table and the RIIA, and thus the British monarchy. As a reward and a test of what he had learned, Kistner was placed in charge of a small group consisting of James Schlesinger, Alexander Haig, and Daniel Ellsberg. The Round Table was using to conduct a series of experiments. Cooperation with the group was the Institute of Policy Studies chief theoretician Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky is not what you think he is, folks. He's a wolf in sheep's clothing. He's fooled just about everybody. Okay, so this is the Institute of Policy Studies. He plays this game with people. People think he's a great guy. He's not. Haig, if you remember, Alexander Haig was almost back in the 1980s when Reagan was in trouble. I think he was shot. He was going to be the second in command, and actually took over for a period of time, I think a day or two at one point, being the commander-in-chief of everything, if I recall correctly, when Reagan was shot. Haig, like Kistner, worked for General Kramer, albeit not as a driver, and the general found a number of varied openings to the Department of Defense for his protege. Once Kistner was installed as National Security Advisor, Kramer got Haig the job as his deputy, Ellsberg. Haig and Kistner then set in motion the RIIA Watergate plan to oust President Nixon for disobeying direct instructions. Haig played the lead role in brainwashing and confusing President Nixon, and in effect, it was Kistner who ran the White House during the softening up of the president. As I mentioned in 1984, Haig was a White House go-between known as Deep Throat, passing information to the Washington Post team of Woodward and Bernstein. The Watergating of Nixon was the biggest coup yet pulled off by the Round Table as an agency and arm of the RIIA. All the tangled threats led back to the Round Table, from there to the RIIA, and right back to the Queen of England. The humiliation of Nixon was an object lesson and a warning to future presidents of the United States not to imagine they could go against the Committee of 300 and win. Kennedy was brutally murdered in full view of the American people for the same reason. Nixon was not considered worthy enough to suffer the same fate as John F. Kennedy, they say. But whatever the method used, the Committee of 300 made sure that all would-be aspirants for the White House got the message. Nobody's beyond our reach. That this message remains just as forceful as it was when Kennedy was murdered and Nixon hounded out of office is evident by the character of President George Bush, whose eagerness to please his masters should be cause for grave concern among those who worried about the future of the United States. The purpose of the exercise was made clear in the Pentagon Papers episode in the drafting of Schlesinger into the Nixon administration to act as a spoiler in the defense establishment and a counterforce to the development of atomic energy, which role Schlesinger could carry out from the shelter of his position in the Atomic Energy Commission. One of his key factors in deindustrializing the United States in the planned Club of Rome post-industrial zero-growth strategy. That's why the United States has been destroying itself for a long time here. Self-destruction. From this beginning, we begin to trace the roots of 1991 recession depression, which has thus far cost the jobs of 30 million Americans. It is virtually impossible to penetrate the Committee of 300 and the oligarchy families that go to make it up. The camouflage they pull over themselves as protective covering is very hard to rip off. The fact should be noted by every freedom-loving American. The Committee of 300 dictates what passes for United States foreign and domestic policies and has done so for over 200 years. Nowhere was this more strikingly portrayed than when a cocky President Truman had the wind knocked out of him by Churchill, ramrodding the so-called Truman Doctrine down the throat of the little man from Independence, Missouri. Some of their former members whose descendants fill vacancies caused by death and present members include Sir Martin Turner, Gerald Vithers, Samuel Morgenthau, the Inchichaposis, Keswicks, Pieces, P-E-A-S-E-S, Schroeders, Arleys, A-I-R-L-I-E-S, Churchills, Frasers, Lazars, and Jardine Madison. The full list of members is presented elsewhere in this book. These people on the committee ordered President Wilson to go to war against Germany in the First World War. This committee ordered Roosevelt to endure the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor with the object of getting the United States in the Second World War. These people, the committee ordered this nation to war in Korea, Vietnam, and the Persian Gulf. The plain truth is that the United States has fought in 5 wars this century for and on behalf of the infamous Committee of 300. It seems that apart from just a few, no one has stopped to ask, why are we fighting these wars? These big drum of patriotism, martial music, and waving flags and yellow ribbons, it seems, cause a great nation to become bereft of its senses. On the 50th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, a new hate Japan campaign is being waged, not by the Institute of Pacific Relations, but in the most direct, brazen method by the Bush administration and the Congress. The object is the same as it was when Roosevelt inspired the attack on Pearl Harbor: paint the Japanese as aggressors and wage economic war, then ready our forces for the next phase, armed aggression against Japan. This is already in the works. It's only a matter of time before more of our sons and daughters are sent off to be slaughtered in the service of the feudal lords of the Committee of 300. We ought to shout from the housetops, it is not for freedom nor for love of country that we are going to die, but for a system of tyranny that will shortly envelope the entire world. These are things, master plans, the leading of any country to destroy itself, you see. And the United States has been self-destructing since the 60s, practically even probably after the World War II. So tight is the grip of the organization on Britain that 90% of British citizens have since the 1700s been forced to accept as their share less than 20% of national wealth of the country. This is what the oligarchy feudal lords, folks, this is the feudalism is still here. It's just covered up in a different way. This is what the oligarchy feudal lords of England like to call democracy. These nice, proper English gentlemen are in reality ultimately ruthless. What they did in India, Sudan, Egypt, Iraq, Iran, and Turkey will repeat it in every country under the New World Order, one world government. They will use every nation as its wealth to protect their privileged way of life. It is this class of British aristocrats whose fortunes are instrumentally woven and intertwined with the drug trade, the gold, the diamonds and arms trade, banking, commerce and industry, oil and news media, and the entertainment industry. Apart from the rank and file of Labour Party, but not its leaders, the majority of British political leaders are descendants of title families. The title has been hereditary and handed down from father to eldest son. This system ensures that no outsider aspires to political power in England. Nevertheless, some aliens have been able to squeeze their way in. Take the case of Lord Halifax, former British ambassador to Washington, the man who delivered Committee of 300 orders to our government during the Second World War. Halifax's son, Charles Wood, married a Miss Primrose, a blood relative of the Lord Rothschilds. Behind such names as Lord Swallowton is hidden the name of Montagu, director of the Bank of England, and advisor and confidant of the majority stockholders of the Shell Oil Company. Queen Elizabeth II, all are members of the Committee of 300. Some of the old barriers have been broken down. Title today is not only a criteria for admission to the Club of Rome, you see. It's appropriate to provide an overview of what the Committee of 300 hopes to achieve, what its aims are, objectives are, before we proceed to its vast, far-flung, interlocking interfacing of banks, insurance companies, corporations, etc. The following information has taken years of investigative research to put together from hundreds of documents and sources of mine who gave me access to some of the papers in which the details are hidden. The Committee of 300, the Committee of 300 consists of certain individual specialists in their own field, including cultists, diabolicists, mind-altering drugs, and specialists in murder by poison, intelligent bankers, and every facet of commercial activities. It will be necessary to mention former members since deceased because their former roles and because their places were given to family members of new members considered worthy of the honor. Included in the membership are the old families of the European black nobility, the American Eastern liberal establishment, in the Freemasonry hierarchy and the Order of Skull and Bones, the Illuminati, or as it's known by the committee, Moriah, Conquering Wind, the Mumma Group, that is MUMMA Group, the National and World Council of Churches, the Circle of Initiative, the Nine Unknown Men, Lucas Trust, LUCIS Trust, which, who is it here? Let's see who this is. Is that it? It's not. Hold on a second here. This is the book right here. I'll show you. No, that's not it right here. Yeah, this is from Alice A. Bailey book, and this is published by the Lucas Trust. Okay, from intellect to intuition. This was a book written back in the 1930s on what's happening today. Let's see where we're at. Jesuit liberation theologians, the Order of the Elders of Zion, the NASA, that's the Nazis, not Nazis, the NASI Princes, the International Monetary Fund, the Bank of International Settlements, the United Nations, the Central, that is, the British Quartar Coloronio, Italian P2 Masonry, especially those in the Vatican hierarchy, the CIA, Tavistock Institute selected personnel, various members of leading foundations and insurance companies named in the list that followed Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, the Milner Group, Round Table, the CINI Foundation, German Marshall Fund, Ditchley Foundation, NATO, Club of Rome, Environmentalists, Order of St. John of Jerusalem, One World Government Church, Socialist International, Black Order, the Thule Society, the THULE Society, which was involved with Hitler, Anna Hervé, Rosicrucians, the Great Superior Ones, and literally hundreds of other organizations. What then are we looking at? A loose-knit gathering of people with weird ideas? Certainly not. The Committee of 300, which has a 150-year history, we have some of the most brilliant intellectuals assembled to form a completely totalitarian, absolutely controlled new society, only it isn't new. Having drawn most of its ideas from the Club Occulticus, CULTUS, Diabolicius, DIABOLICUS, it strives towards a one world government, rather well described by one of its late members, H.G. Wells, in his work commissioned by the committee, which Wells boldly calls the Open Conspiracy Plan for World Revolution. It was a bold statement of intent, but not readily so bold, since nobody believes Wells except the great superior ones, the Avenators, and those who were that what we call insiders today. Here's an extract of what Wells proposes, okay? This is in the Open Conspiracy. We appear first, I believe, as a conscious organization of intelligence, and in some cases, wealthy men as a movement having distinct social and political aims, confessedly ignoring most of the existing apparatus of political control, of using it only as an incidental implement in the stages, a mere movement of a number of people in a certain direction who would presently discover with a sort of a surprise the common object toward which they are all moving. In all sorts of ways, they will be influencing and controlling the ostensibly government. Like George L. Wells' 1984, Wells' accounts is a masked appeal for one world government. Summarize the intent and purpose of the Committee of 300 is to bring to pass the following conditions: a one world government and a one unit monetary system on a permanent, non-elected hereditary oligarchies who self-select from among their numbers in the form of feudal system as it was in the Middle Ages. In this one world entity, population will be limited by restrictions on the number of children per family, diseases, wars, famines until 1 billion people who are useful to the ruling class in areas which will be strictly and clearly defined remain in the total world population. There will be no middle class, only rulers and servants. All laws will be uniform under a legal system of world courts practicing the same unified codes of law, backed up by a one world government police force and a one world unified military to enforce laws in all former countries where no national boundaries shall exist. The system will be on the basis of a welfare state. Those who are obedient and subservient to the one world government will be rewarded with the means to live. Those who are rebellious will simply be starved to death or declared outlaws, thus a target for anyone who wishes to kill them. Privately owned firearms or weapons of any kind will be prohibited. Only one religion will be allowed, and that will be the form of a one world government church, which has been in existence since 1920, as we shall see. Satanism, Luciferianism, and witchcraft shall be recognized as a legitimate one world government curriculum. With no private or church schools, all Christian churches have already been subverted, and Christianity will be a thing of the past in the one world government. To induce a state where there is no individual freedom or any concept of liberty surviving, there shall be no such thing as republicanism, sovereignty, or rights residing with the people. National pride or racial identity shall be stamped out in this transition phase. It shall be subject to the severest penalties to even mention one's racial origin. Each person shall be fully indoctrinated that he or she is a creature of the one world government with identification number clearly marked on their person so as to be readily accessible, which identification number shall be in the master file of the NATO computer in Brussels, Belgium, subject to instant retrieval by any agency of the one world government at any time. The master file of the CIA, FBI, state and local police agencies, IRS, FEMA, Social Security shall be vastly expanded and from the basis of personal records of all individuals in the United States. Marriage shall be outlawed, and there shall be no family life as we know it. Children will be removed from their parents at an early age and brought up by wards at state properties. Such experiment was carried out in East Germany under Erich Honecker, Honnecker, when children were taken away from parents considered by the state to be disloyal citizens. Women will be degraded through the continual process of women liberation movements. Free sex shall be mandatory. Failure to comply at least once by the age of 20 shall be punishable by severe shall be punished by severe reprisal against her person. Self-abortion shall be taught and practiced after 2 children are born to a woman. Such records shall be contained in the personal files of each woman in the one world government regional computers. If a woman falls pregnant after she has previously given birth to 2 children, she shall be forcibly removed to an abortion clinic or such an abortion and sterilization to be carried out. Pornography shall be promoted and compulsively showing in every theater of cinema, including homosexuality and lesbian pornography. The use of recreational drugs shall be compulsory, which each person allotted drug quotas which can be purchased at one world government stores throughout the world. Mind control drugs, which will be expanded and uses become compulsory. Such mind control drugs shall be given in food or in water supplies without the knowledge or consent of the people. Drug bars shall be set up, run by one world government employees, where the slave class shall be able to spend their free time. In this manner, the non-elite masses will be reduced to the level and behavior of controlled animals with no will of their own and easily regulated and controlled. The economic system shall be based upon the ruling ethical class, allowing just enough food and services to be produced to keep the mass slave labor camps going. All wealth shall be aggregated in the hands of elite members of the Committee of 300. Each individual shall be indoctrinated to understand that he or she is totally dependent upon the state for survival. The world shall be ruled by a Committee of 300, executive decrees, which became instant law. Boris Yeltsin is using Committee of 300 decrees to impose the committee's will on Russia as a trial run. Courts of punishment and not courts of justice shall exist. Industry is to be totally destroyed along with nuclear power industry systems. Only the Committee of 300 members and the elitists shall have the right to any of the earth's resources. Agriculture shall be solely in the hands of the Committee of 300, with food production strictly controlled. As these measures begin to take effect, large populations in the cities shall be forcibly removed to remote areas, and those who refuse to go shall be exterminated in the manner of the one world government, experiment carried out by Pol Pot in Cambodia. I would recommend that you would watch The Killing Fields, which talks about what took place in Cambodia. In fact, it would be a requirement that you look into this and see what happens. Euthanasia for the terrible, ill, and the aged shall be compulsory. No city shall be larger than a predetermined number, as described in the work of Calgary, Kalgeri. Essential workers will be moved to other cities if the one they are in becomes overpopulated. Other non-essential workers will be chosen at random and sent to unpopulated cities to fill quotas. At least 4 billion useless eaters shall be eliminated by the year 2050 by means of limited wars, organized epidemics of fatal, rapid-acting diseases, and starvation. Energy, food, and water shall be kept at subsistent levels for the non-elite, starting with the white populations of Western Europe and North America, and then spreading to other races. The population of Canada, Western Europe, and the United States will be decimated more rapidly than other countries on the other continents until the world's population reaches a manageable level of 1 billion, or as they say, of which 500 million will consist of Chinese and Japanese races, selected because they are people who have been regimented for centuries and who are accustomed to obeying authorities without question. From time to time, there shall be artificial contrived food and water shortages and medical care to remind the masses that their very existence depends on the goodwill of the Committee of 300. After destruction of housing, auto, steel, and heavy goods industry, there shall be limited housing, and industries of any kind allowed to remain shall be under direction of NATO, Club, or Rome, as shall all scientific and space exploration development limited to the elite under the control of the Committee of 300. Space weapons of all former nations shall be destroyed along with nuclear weapons. All essential and non-essential pharmaceutical products, such as doctors, dentists, healthcare workers, will be registered in the Central Computer Data Bank, and no medicine or medical care will be prescribed without express permission of regional comptrollers responsible for each city, town, and village. The United States will be flooded by people of alien cultures who will eventually overwhelm the white Americans. People with no concept of what the United States Constitution stands for and who will, in consequence, do nothing to defend it, and in whose minds the concept of liberty and justice is so weak as to matter little. Food and shelter shall be their main concern. No central bank, save the Bank of International Settlements and the World Bank, shall be allowed to operate. Private banks will be outlawed. Remuneration for work performed shall be under a uniform predetermined scale throughout the one world government. There shall be no wage disputes allowed, nor any diversion from the standard uniform scales of pay laid down by the one world government. Those who break the law will be instantly executed. There shall be no cash or coinage in the hands of the non-elite. All transactions shall be carried out by means of a debit card which shall bear the identification number of the holder. Any person who in any way infringes the rules and regulations of the Committee of 300 shall have the use of his or her card suspended for varying times according to the nature and severity of infringement. We're already seeing that in China, folks, okay? So it's at the doorstep here. Such persons will find when they go to make purchases that their card is blacklisted and they will not be able to obtain services of any kind. Attempts to trade old coins, that is to say, silver coins or previously and now defunct nations, shall be treated as a capital crime subject to death penalty. All such coinage shall be required to be surrendered within a general time, along with guns, rifles, explosions, and automobiles. Only elite and one world government high-ranking functionaries will be allowed private transport, weapons, coinage, and automobiles. If the offense is a serious one, the card will be seized at a checking point where it is presented, Thereafter, that person shall not be able to obtain food, water, shelter, and employment. Medical services shall be officially listed as an outlaw. Large bands of outlaws will thus be created. They will live in regions that best afford subsistence, subject to being hunted down and shot on sight. Persons assisting outlaws in any way whatsoever shall likewise be shot. Outlaws who fail to surrender to the police or military after the declared period of time shall have a former family member selected at random to serve prison terms in their stead. Rival factions and groups such as Arabs and Jews and African tribes shall have different magnified and allowed to wage wars of extermination against each other under the eyes of NATO and UN observers. The same tactics will be used in Central and South America. These wars of attrition shall take place before the takeover of the one world government and shall be engineered on every continent where large groups of people with ethnic and religious differences live, such as the Sikhs, the Muslims, the Palestinians, and the Hindu Indians. Ethnic and religious differences shall be magnified and exacerbated, and violent conflict as a means of setting their differences shall be encouraged and fostered. They want people to fight each other. All information services and print media shall be under the control of the one world government. Regular brainwashing control measures shall be passed off as entertainment in the manner in which it was practiced and become a fine art in the United States. Youths removed from disloyal parents shall receive special education designed to brutalize them. Youth of both sexes shall receive training to qualify as prisoner guards for the one world labor camp system. It is obvious from the foregoing that much work remains to be done before the dawning of the new world order can occur. The Committee of 300 has long ago perfected plans to destabilize civilization as we know it, such of which plans were made known by Zygmunt Brzezinski in his classic work, The Technotronic Era, and the works of Aurelio Peccei, who founded the Club of Rome, especially in his book called The Chaz Ahead. In The Chaz Ahead, CHASM, Persidia spells out Committee of 300 plans to tame man, whom he called the enemy. Petrus quoted what Felix Dzerzhinsky once said to Sidney Riley at the height of the Red Terror when millions of Russians were being murdered. Why should I concern myself with how many die? Even the Christian Bible says, what is man, that God should be mindful of him. For me, men are nothing but a brain at one end and a shit factory at the other. It was found that Brutus' views of the man that Emmanuel the Christ came to rescue the world. Sidney Riley was the MI6 operative sent to watch over Dzerzhinsky's activities. Riley was allegedly shot by his friend Felix while attempting to flee Russia. The elaborate plot was devised when certain members of the British Parliament raised a hue and cry and began to loudly demand accounting of Riley's activities in Russia, which threatened to expose the roles of the Committee of 300 in gaining control of the Baku oil fields and its major role in assisting Lenin and trying the Bolshevik Revolution. Rather than have the truth dragged out of Riley, MI6 thought it expedient to stage his death. Riley lived out his days in utter luxury in Russian villa, usually reserved for the Bolshevik elite. Arguing that chaos would ensue unless the Atlantic Alliance, a euphemism for the Committee of 300 rule post-industrial America. Peccei proposed a Malthusian triasion on a global stage. He envisioned a collusion between the scientification, technological, military apparatus of the Soviet Union and the Western world. Thus, the Warsaw Pact countries were to be offered a conversion with the West and a one world government to run global affairs, a foundation of crisis management and global planning. Well, those countries, the Warsaw Pact countries, are now part of their independence, supposedly, although they're between Europe and also Russia at this point. That's my take on it. So I'm kind of interested in that. Events unfolding in what was formerly the USSR and the emergence of several independent states in a loose federation in Russia is exactly what was emphasized by Peccei and the Club of Rome. This is clearly spelled out in both the books I have mentioned. A USSR thus divided will be easier to cope with than that is, the strong united Soviet nation. Plans that were laid down by the Committee of 300 for a one world government, which included the prospect of dividing Russia, are now approaching a point of rapid escalation. Events in Russia at the close of 1991 are all the most dramatic when viewed against the 1960 long range planning by the Committee of 300. In Western Europe, the people are working towards a federalization of states within a one government framework with a single currency. From there, the EEC system, the European system, will be transferred bit by bit to the United States and Canada. The United Nations is benign slowly but surely transformed into a rubber stamp of one world government with policy dictated to it by the United States, as we saw in the case of the Gulf War. Precisely the same thing is happening with the British Parliament. Discussion of British participation in the Gulf War was kept to a ridiculous minimal level and belatedly took place only during a motion to adjourn the House. This has never happened before in ancient history of Parliament, where so important a decision had to be made and so little time was allotted for discussion. One of the most noteworthy events in Parliament history has gone virtually unknown. We are close to the point where the United States will send its military forces to settle any and all disputes brought before the United Nations. Departing Secretary General Perez de Cuellar, I can't pronounce his name, I'll just say Cuellar, heavily laden with bribe money, was the most compliant UN leader in history in granting demands of the United States without discussion. His successor will be even more inclined to go along with whatever the U.S. government places before him. This is an important step along the road to a one world government. The International Court of Justice at The Hague will be used in increasing measures in the next 2 years to settle legal arguments of all types. It is, of course, the prototype for a one world government legal system that will supplant all others. As for central banks, essential in the planning of the New World Order, this is already very much a fait accompli, with the Bank of International Settlements dominating the scene at the close of 1991. This is 30 years ago, folks. Remember this. Private banks are fast disappearing in preparation for the Big Ten banks that will control banking the world over under the guidance of BIS, Banks of International Settlement, and the IMF. Welfare states abound in Europe, and the United States is fast becoming the largest welfare state in the world. Once people come to depend on government for their subsistence, it will be very hard to wean them away, correct, from it, as we saw in the results of the last midterm elections held in the United States, where 98% of the incumbents were returned to Washington to enjoy the good life in spite of their utterly deplorable records. The abolition of privately owned firearms is already in force in 3/4 of the world. Only in the United States can the populace still own guns at all types, but that legal right is being chipped away at an alarming rate by local and state laws which violate the constitutional right of citizens to bear arms. Private gun ownership will have become a thing of the past of the United States by the year 2010. Well, 2010 is past, folks, and we still have our arms, but they are registered, you see, so they know who's got them, you see. Similar education is being eroded at an alarming rate. Private schools are being forced to close by a variety of legal stratagems and lack of funding. The standard education in the United States has already sunk to such a deplorable level that today it can barely be classified as education at all. This is according to plan, as I described earlier, that one world government does not want our youth to be properly educated. Destruction of national identity proceeds a part of pace 2. It is no longer a good thing to be patriotic unless it is at the cause of some one world government project, such as the war on genocide being waged against the nation of Iraq, or the impending destruction of Libya, or the radical pride is now frowned upon and deemed to be a legal act in many parts of the world, including US, Britain, Western Europe, and Canada, all countries having the largest concentration of the white race. So you see the white race is a problem. Led by the secret societies in America, destruction of Republican forms of government have proceeded at pace since the close of World War II. A list of such governments destroyed by the U.S. is long, and it's difficult for the non-informed to accept that the government of a country allergically wedded to republicanism under a unique constitution would engage in such conduct. But the facts speak for themselves. This is a goal which was set over a century ago by the Committee of 300. The United States has led the attacks on such governments and continues to do so even as the United States Republican base is being steadily undermined. Yes, this reminds me simply is this, that why does the United States has over 300, almost 300 bases in the world, military bases. Therefore, there for a reason, folks. Starting with James Earl Carter, Jimmy Carter, legal counsel Lloyd Cutler, a committee of constitutional lawyers have been working to change the U.S. Congress to a non-representative parliamentary system. Work has been in progress since 1979 on the blueprint for such a change, and because of his devotion to the cause, Cutler was made a member of the Committee of 300. The final draft for a parliamentary type of government is to be presented in the Committee of 300 at the end of 1993. In a new parliamentary system, members will not be responsible to their to their citizens, I should say, constituents, but to the parliament whips and will vote their way they're told to vote. Thus, by judicial and bureaucratic subversion, will the Constitution vanish, as will individual liberty. Pre-planned degrading of man through licentious sexual practices will be stepped up. New sexual degenerated cults are even now being set up by the British Crown, working through the SIS and the MI6 service. As we already know, all cults operating in the world today are the product of a British intelligence acting for the oligarchy rulers. Again, I'll say that again. We already know all cults operating in the world today are the product of British intelligence acting for the oligarchy rulers. We may think this phrase of creating a whole new cult which specializes in sexual degeneration behavior is still far off, but my information is that it is due to be stepped up in 1992. By 1994, it will be quite commonplace to have live shows in the most prestigious clubs and places of entertainment. This type of entertainment is already in the process of having its image cleaned and brightened. Soon, the big names in Hollywood and the entertainment world will be recommending this or that club as a must for live sex shows. Lesbianism and homosexuality will not be featured. The new socially accepted entertainment will consist of heterosexual display and will be written up in reviews as one finds in today's newspaper about shows on Broadway or the latest hit movie. Unprecedented assault on moral values will go into high gear in 1992. Pornography will no longer be called pornography, but adult sex entertainment. Sloganeers will take this form of why hide it when everybody does it? Let's take away the image that public display of sex are ugly and dirty. No more will those who care for this type of unbridled sexual lust have to go to seedy porno parlors. That's correct, folks. They don't have to go to those places anymore. Instead, the upper class supper clubs and places favored by the rich and famous will make public sexual displays a highly artistic form of entertainment. Worse yet, some church leaders will even recommend it. Well, he didn't know this, but the internet is the tool now. You see, that's where you can watch any type of sexual events you can want. So you don't even have to go anywhere now. It's at home. The volumes of all prevailing and enormous social psychiatric apparatus put in place by Tavistock Institute and its huge web of relating capabilities has been under the control of one single entity, and that entity is still in control as we enter 1992. That single entity, the conspirators' hierarchy, is called the Committee of 300. It is a power structure. It is a power center that operates far beyond the reach of any single world leader or any government, including the United States government and its presidents, and especially late John F. Kennedy found out. The Kennedy murder was an operation of the Committee of 300, and we shall return to that. The Committee of 300 is the ultimate secret society made of untouchable ruling class, which includes the Queen of England, the Queen of Netherlands, the Queen of Denmark, and the royal families of Europe. These aristocrats decided at the death of Queen Victoria, the matriarch of the Venetian Black Guelphs, Guelphs, that in order to gain worldwide control, it would be necessary for the aristocratic members to go into business with the non-aristocratic but extremely powerful leaders of the corporate business on a global scale. And so the doors to the ultimate power were open to what the Queen of England likes to refer to as the commoners. From my days in the intelligence business, I know that the heads of foreign government refers to this all-powerful body as the magicians. Stalin coined his own phrase to describe them, the dark forces. And President Eisenhower was never able to get beyond the court Jew, that is Hoffenjew, grade, referred to as a colossal understatement as the military industrial complex. Stalin kept the USSR heavily armed with conventional and nuclear weapons because he did not trust what he called the family. His ingrained mistrust and fear of Committee of 300 proved to be well founded. Popular entertainment, especially the medium of movie making, was used to bring discredit upon those who tried to warn this most dangerous threat to individual liberty and freedom of mankind. Freedom is a God given law which man has constantly sought to subvert and undermine. Yet the yearning for freedom for each individual is so great that up to now, no system has been able to tear that feeling from the heart of man. The experiments that have gone on in USSR, Britain, and Russia, and the United States to blunt and dug man's yearning for freedom have thus far proved to be unsuccessful. But with the coming of the New World Order, one world government, far-reaching experiments will be stepped up to drive man's God-given yearning for freedom out of his mind, body, and soul. What we are already experiencing is but nothing, a mere bagatelle, which compared with what is to come. Attacking the soul is the thrust of a host of experiments being ready. And I regret to say that the institution of the United States will play a leading role in terrible experiments which have already been carried out on local small-scale levels at such places as Bethesda Naval Hospital and the Vaticanville prison in California. The movies we have seen thus far include the James Bond series, The Assassination Bureau, the Magnetic Circle, and so on. They were made-believe movies designed to hide the truth that such organizations do exist and on a far greater scale than ever Hollywood fertile ideal men could dream of. Yet the Assassination Bureau is absolutely real. It exists in Europe and the United States solely to do the bidding of the Committee of 300 to carry out high-level assassinations where all other remedies have failed. It was Permindix, that is Permindx, which ran the Kennedy assassination under the direction of Sir William Stephenson for years, Queen of England's #1 pest control operative. Okay, I'm thinking I'm going to quit here, folks. I'm about to lose my voice, and so we're going to stop here because I'm becoming a little weary. Um, yes, statement here. Computer simulation, they activated in 2011. Okay, Jonathan. I see you. And also you stated here, the world is currently being run on a computer set. They have managed to modify the fabrics of space, time, and atomic structure, molecules into. Okay, let me see. You've got a lot of things here, Jonathan. Let me start at the 2025 Sears Pandemic Agenda. They finished the training for that last year in October, similar to the October 2019 training for the COVID-19. The world will be shut down again. Yes, I'm afraid that's going to happen. So take out as much loans as you can. All debt will be wiped. Well, I didn't realize that, Jonathan. You take out as much money as you can in order to take care of yourself, is what I'm gathering. Continue, Jonathan Alert says, John Biden is and will be the last president of the United States. There will be no more presidents after Joseph Biden. Yeah, I've heard that, Jonathan. Sure have. I don't know if it's true, but I will keep that in my noggin up here to remember that. I suspected something of that nature is happening. His time of office will come to the end of 2024. So something's going to happen during that election. So we're entering now 2023. So we're talking about a year and maybe 6 to 7 months, and something is going to happen that will basically, I gather, was cancel that. Something devastating. You stated here the world is currently being ran on a computer simulation. They have managed to modify the fabrics of space, time, and atomic structure. So yes, this is kind of the construct we have here is a computer simulation, correct? They activated it in 2011. Let me ask you something, Jonathan. Do you know when you say they activated in 2011, can you tell me any more specific information on that? You get a chance? Um, Thank you for sharing, Jonathan. Um, yeah, what Dr. John Coleman shares here is old, but yet it's still valid. He already saw this because he, in a way, was working with Tavistock. He actually had their playbook or their workbooks. So that's how he's put this together. And there are many. There are two people have asked me, is Dr. John Coleman still alive? As far as I know, I don't know. I don't know. I've looked up his name and there's nothing there. Um, so I don't know if he's alive or not. Uh, with him putting out these strong books that he's put out here, one being the Tavistock Institute, the Committee of 300, plus other ones, um, there are he's put out are pretty damning information, and they're not what I call makes you feel nice and warm and fuzzy inside. Um, so, if anyone else wants to share here, they're welcome to share. I noticed that there are three people here, so if you want to share anything, you're welcome to share at this point. Um, I appreciate you, Jonathan, for sharing that information. One other question I got for you, Jonathan. What does the Sears, SEERS, represent? Um, I'm curious about that. Um, I know it stands for something, um, but if you don't know, if you're already gone, I understand. Um, I've heard the deal with Biden being the last president. Um, and again, I think that something is going to happen. I think there's very strong indications that our economy is hanging on by a thread. Um, there's been all kinds of things that happened in the last 6 months, so to speak, that the Congress has to appropriate more money to do these things. We're running out of money. We're creating money. What about a paper, which means it's the paper money is being printed so quickly now it's inflating because there's nothing there. This is that's why you can't. That's why you pay something that was 19 or 20 cents for a lemon, maybe 2.5 to 3 years ago, is now 65 cents at the Walmart. So that's a 300% almost increase. In fact, it is over 300% increase. And other things that you do at the grocery store, has anyone bought steak here recently? I haven't. I haven't bought steak since probably 2020, um, and I can't afford it. I if I buy any meat, it's hamburger meat. That's it. Um, so, um, so anything anyone wants to say, you got a chance to speak now. If you want to share or say something here, I know Jonathan has said it quite a bit. Jonathan Alert has stated some things here at 7:59. And it's a little bit 5 minutes after 8 here on the East Coast. Dr. John Coleman, I don't, like I said, I don't know if he's living. He may be dead by now. But to those who are out there listening, I've got another book here, and I'll be sharing from this. This is a work by Michael Hoffman. This is one of his newest books. This was printed, I think, in 2021, and I just received it. Yes, 2021. He's talking about twilight language, and we'll be going through this book in the very near future. I've actually done one small video on that, sharing that information. And so that'll be one of the books I'll be going through. And I actually would be like to share. I've already done some of this, what I call amusing ourselves to death. And then we'll probably will deal with the Skull and Bones book I have here in front of me, fleshing out Skull and Bones, which is this particular book here, um, which is part of Yale. And there is quite a few pictures in this particular book. You speak to particular guys, such. But anyway, this is like here, George Bush, which is he's already passed away, his son. And then I'd like to be interested to read something from. I have 2 or 3 Alice Bailey books, which is this particular book here, Intellect to Intuition. Is that the New Age deal? That sounds like it, doesn't it? To the intellect, that is your what I would call being logical, to intuition. Interesting. Um, and I got plenty of books to read. Reason why I write, I'm sorry, reason why I read these books, folks, is for a reason. For those who cannot afford to buy these books, especially Dr. John Coleman's works, which are unavailable. They're available if you got $400 or $500. And the same thing with Eustace Mullins. His works are expensive. So anyway, well, anyone else who wants to comment, I'm going to get ready to leave here because I'm going to get something to eat. So I appreciate all of you being here and sharing, especially Jonathan. Thank you again for your comments. You're more than welcome to share anytime that I'm actually on a live program. You have a good night, and the rest of you, okay? So we'll talk to you later, and have a good evening. Thank you for being here. Good night.